Well, hello dear comrades, and welcome back to our close reading of Slow Down by Kōhei Saitō. Last week we went through the preface, the introduction, and we also talked about Saito's life and what he wishes to accomplish with this book. Now that we've done that, we can go through the first chapter of Slow Down, titled Climate Change and the Imperial Mode of Living. So it starts with Saito telling us about the sins of Nobel Prizes in economics. Now what does he mean by that? Let's talk about the Nobel Prize in economics. It's also known as the Sveriges Riksbank Prize because it's not a prize awarded by the Nobel Foundation, but by the Swedish Central Bank back in 1968. It's a bank that awards the prize, the Nobel Prize in economics, with a committee composed of mainstream academic economists. Most of them work in neoclassical, neoliberal, and technocratic paradigm. So it shouldn't be a surprise that there has never been a Nobel awarded to an economist who argues for post-capitalism, socialism, or degrowth, or advocates for abolishing private property, or proposes non-market systems as alternatives. So no Marxist has ever received the Nobel. Radical thinkers like Joanne Robinson, Samir Amin, Ha-Joon Chang have not been recognized. Even Thomas Piketty, whose work on capital and inequality is still market-based, has not been awarded. So progress in economics seemed to mean simply finding new, more efficient ways to make profits. And that was the trend until 1998. That was the year that the prize was awarded to a critic of the current economy, Amartya Sen. So he's an Indian economist who was the first to be awarded the prize for introducing the concept of capabilities as a metric for human well-being. For Sen, the economy should also focus on human well-being, not just extracting value, but he only asks for a reform of capitalism. So, he asks for a way to make capitalism more just or efficient, not to transcend it, like growth was still the priority. And that became the new trend. Economic progress must also be measured by the extent to which it improves people's lives and our well-being, but we shouldn't lose sight of what matters the most, meaning growth. But why should we always have economic growth as the priority? Well, the rationale is that however you want to organize the economy, without growth, everyone will be miserable. All we need is to find formulae that reconcile both well-being and growth. And so with this, you have the myth that without capitalist economies, you cannot have nice things. So if someone is going to cost us, is going to cost us economic growth, no matter how vital it is, it's not worth it. And so this brings us to the current climate crisis, where we have something similar. The economy must now also take into account its impact on the environment, and so the same dilemma reemerges. If economic activity is creating economic growth, then that economic activity must not be altered or change in ways that we lose economic growth. Okay, so economic growth becomes some sort of a sine qua non condition for a good life. Okay, and if you make it so, you need to be aware that without natural resources, you can't have either the economy or those good lives. Okay, you can have neither the economy nor those good lives without natural resources. But the economy is precisely what is destroying the planet and therefore those resources. So we need to reform it again, and this time by integrating ecology into it. So, can we find the right equilibrium? Can we find the magic formula that allows us to keep extracting value while at the same time not destroying the planet? Well, the Swedish Central Bank has a prize waiting for anyone that can find this formula, and guess what? In 2018, someone apparently found it and received the prize. This was a Yale University professor of economics, William Nordhaus, whose main domain of research is economics of climate change. So you would think that this is good news. Now, like when Sen was awarded the prize, people have become aware of the impact our economy has on the environment and on the climate. So no more debates with skeptics and with science deniers. Now we can finally say our voices have been heard, our leaders will finally become aware, and now they are going to be responsible. But just like with Sen, the priority is still economic growth. It is still only when someone came along and proved that caring about the planet doesn't have to cost us growth, that climate change economists started to be recognized by the Swedish Central Bank. So this, in reality, isn't good news at all. When banks start giving prizes to people about topics like climate change or happiness, their end game is ideological. It's to shut down the opposition. These prizes are like celebrations of triumph. It's like sending a message: see, don't listen to the Marxists, capitalism works, trust us, keep working for economic growth, we know what we're doing. And so Nordhaus is one of those guys, another proof that growth must be the priority, even in climate change. Because he doesn't challenge capitalism, but simply integrated climate change into economic models that preserve capitalist structures. And so this is why many called Nordhaus's nomination for the prize a catastrophe. In the first footnote, Saito mentions Jason Hickel, who made that claim in an article from Foreign Policy. Now, I didn't read the article because you have to pay access to it, and I'd rather pay for other things than articles from Foreign Policy. But yeah, it's a catastrophe. Because let's be clear, the measures that Nordhaus is going to suggest don't work. Those who want them to work are capitalists who want to keep extracting value while the world burns. In reality, it's just conceptually impossible for there to be a green capitalistic economy. So these are just myths, like I said, to calm critiques so that they don't revolt against capitalism. Now I should mention that there is one exception from 2009 who received the prize, Elinor Ostrom, but we will come back to her in a few weeks. So anyways, let's go back to Nordhaus and the reason why his nomination is a catastrophe. It's because of an article he wrote back in 1991 and was the basis for his line of research ever since and led him to be awarded. It's called "To Slow or Not to Slow the Economics of the Greenhouse Effect." So what's wrong with it? First, let's talk about Saito's contextualization of this article. It was published in 1991, so right after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the fall of the USSR. So this was on the eve of globalization. In the Cold War, globalization was halted as the Soviet Union was delaying the spread of capitalism all over the world, and that also played a role in why greenhouse gases rose only to the extent they did until the 1990s. Nordhaus studies the rises of greenhouse gases in the US, and then he says that this is going to be similar in the rest of the world. What's happening in the US is going to be similar in the rest of the world. And he was right, because the economic model in the USA, once the Soviet Union fell, it's going to spread all over the world, and this, Saito argues, is going to raise gas emissions at uncontrollable speed. As Saito says, speaking of 1991, this was right after the Cold War ended, on the eve of the wave of globalization that would go on to produce unprecedented emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So yes, because you cannot hide the fact that now, with the USSR gone, greenhouse gases are going to go through the roof. So you would expect a lot of strong measures to restrain capitalism, to keep those, to prevent, those gases from raising, right? So what is a capitalist going to do in this situation? Well, he'll try to curb all these alarming calls for strong measures. And Nordhaus was precisely what he needed. Nordhaus is going to acknowledge that, yes, greenhouse gases are going to be on the rise because of economic activities. But don't worry, people. We can find ways to control it. And even if we cannot control it, well, maybe we shouldn't. Yep, you heard that right. Nordhaus is going to argue that maybe we shouldn't try to control climate change or reduce greenhouse emissions, despite that from the introduction of his own article, he says that the accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases like methane, nitrous oxides, and chlorofluorocarbons is expected to produce global warming and other significant climate changes over the next centuries. He recognizes that. He doesn't disprove the scientific consensus that temperature is on the rise since the 1980s at least, mainly because of CO2, which makes 80% of greenhouse gases, and he knows that they are caused by combustion of fossil fuels. I mean, he focuses on the 1980s, but he knows that it started in the mid of the 18th century with the Industrial Revolution and so forth. And he knows that these emissions will keep rising in the future. So he also says there are also calls for drastic curbs on those emissions of greenhouse gases, and there are many policy suggestions to do that. However, according to him, these calls and policies for forceful and alarmist measures to slow greenhouse emissions and curb them, they have been made without any serious attempt to weigh the cost and benefits of climate change. Yep, his problem is that the people saying that we should curb greenhouse emissions, they don't think about what it will cost us to do so. He, on the other hand, is going to give the empirical evidence on the damages from greenhouse warming, which, as we will see, he's going to downplay hard, but also he's going to give us the cost of reducing emissions and concentrations of greenhouse gases. So, there's a point where the marginal cost of reducing greenhouse gases will exceed the marginal damage from greenhouse warming. Like in this paragraph from his, like in this graph, from his 1991 study, like right here, you can see that point Z. So that's the point of laissez-faire. Like we don't try anything to curb climate change. And so not doing anything would be absurd even according to Nordhaus, because the cost of greenhouse warming is going to put on us an insane economic burden, okay? The cost would be insane economically speaking. So we need to reduce emissions. But reduction of greenhouse warming is also going to cost us money, right? As we start decreasing greenhouse warming, we also reduce also the warming cost, but at the same time, we increase the cost of reducing it. The point of an efficient policy is to arrive at this point E. This is where the cost of reducing greenhouse warming, and that's also the abatement function, is equal to the damage greenhouse warming causes. Beyond that point E, the cost of reducing greenhouse warming will be bigger than the damages it causes. And so it won't be worth it. So this is maximizing the net economic welfare, or the green GNP. Green GNP is an adjusted measure of national income that incorporates both the benefits and costs of climate change and climate policy. An example would be this. How much reduction of global warming is going to cost me, and how many benefits it's going to give me? If the benefits outweigh the costs, then I should do it, right? The benefits of reducing global warming outweigh the costs of global warming, then I should reduce global warming. But if not, well, to hell with it. As you can see in this table, still from Nordhaus, you have the costs and benefits of reducing the GHG emissions. So GHG stands for greenhouse gases. If we reduce up to 11%, then the total benefits of reducing warming outweigh the costs. That 11%, that's the E point. That's the most efficient level of GHG control. To reduce GHG emissions up to 11%, that would cost me $2.9 billion, but it will save me $6.5 billion. So it outweighs the cost. But if we try to reduce more than 11%, then the costs are going to outweigh the benefits. In other words, we should never try to reduce emissions beyond 11%, because beyond that point, that would be a huge blow to the economy, a blow that we cannot afford. So it is also interesting to see how he suggests that we reduce those 11% only. And you may know him as the guy who brought the famous carbon tax. Now, he doesn't use the term carbon tax in his article, but he presents the economic logic that underpins carbon taxation, like internalizing the external costs of greenhouse gas emissions by equating the cost of abatement with the damage from emissions. And so this means that you set a price on emissions equal to the estimated social cost of carbon. You just pay a tax for how much carbon you produced. If it is going to cost us a lot for you to produce that much carbon, then you must pay a tax. And so according to Nordhaus, this would force people into reducing their emissions, because if the emissions are too high, then the taxes will be so high that you cannot keep your business going. So in order to save your business, you need to reduce your emissions, but only within those 11%. It's only there where reducing emissions will not lead you to bankruptcy. So what we have here is creating a model to determine an optimal rate of carbon dioxide emission reduction. We must only control global warming to the extent that it doesn't cost us the economy. As Saito says, on the one hand, Nordhaus says that to combat climate change, it is imperative that greenhouse gas emissions decrease. On the other hand, if emissions reduction goals are set too high, it might hinder economic growth. Therefore, he asserts that what we need is balance. But in my view, Nordhaus's proposed balance leans much too far toward the side of economic growth. According to Nordhaus, it is more beneficial to continue at the present rate of economic growth than worry excessively about climate change. So that's already a huge problem, because reducing only 11% of GHG emissions cannot be efficient. Like, Nordhaus isn't saying that we should reduce GHG emissions to zero, but that we reduce them to only 11%. That means that emissions will continue. And that's the problem. Increases in emissions equals destruction of nature. If you reduce only 11%, that isn't going to stop the temperatures from rising to the point where life as we know it will be facing extinction. So what does Nordhaus has to say to that? Well, he has two things to say, and both are awful, like really bad. The first is a belief that is spreading among market fundamentalists and technocratic fanatics, that is, economic growth enriches the world, and this wealth will lead to the creation of new technologies. Therefore, if we allow economic growth to flourish, future generations will use the best technologies to combat climate change more effectively. In effect, Nordhaus is saying that because of the advancement of economic growth and new technologies, there is no reason to preserve the natural world in its present state for future generations. So, did you get that? He's literally saying that it's okay to keep destroying the world because eventually the economy will bring us some sort of miracle technology that will combat or reverse climate change at an optimal cost. This is something that you will hear a lot from people like Nordhaus. The reason why we need to save the economy at all costs is because the economy will eventually get us to a cheap technology that would bring emissions to zero while costing almost nothing. This is an absurd claim that we will go back to several times, so put a pin on that. And the second thing that he says is, well, remember that scientific consensus that we mentioned earlier, and I said that he is going to downplay it a lot, downplay it hard, even though he agrees with it? Well, for him, the climate scientists, if they are right about how much greenhouse gases we have now in the atmosphere and their causes, well, they're not reliable when it comes to prediction about the amount of GHG in the future. That's because, according to him, the optimal rate of carbon dioxide reduction that he proposes would result in a rise in average temperatures by 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. He argues that in his book from 2013, The Climate Casino, he says that by 2100 we must be at 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Like that's the optimal result. Like we cannot allow for temperatures to exceed 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, Nordhaus isn't trying to stop the temperatures from rising. He just wants them to rise slower to buy us enough time to come up with this miracle technology. So he just tells us reducing emissions by 11% is the best deal we can get. We cannot try to reduce more, for now at least. So if we just keep reducing up to 11%, by 2011 the temperatures will be at 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That's for him the tipping point before entering into existential threats for life on Earth. So the point is that we basically have 80 years or so to find this miracle technology, and if we reduce less than 11%, we will have less years. Like you cannot get more than 80 years, and if you reduce emissions by just 9% or 7% instead of 11, you will get even less years to find the miracle technology because the tipping point will be sooner. Okay, so let's say it straight away, this is all bullshit. This is going against the scientific consensus, which he in his book The Climate Casino calls out as not very scientific. Saito gives the reference in the third footnote when he says, as the argument in his book demonstrates, Nordhaus later became stricter in his recommendations for how to combat global warming, but still with an aim to keep the rise in temperatures between 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit and 37.4 degrees Fahrenheit, rather than between the more accepted 34.7 degrees Fahrenheit and 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit range. Not only that, he even declares the 35.6 degree Fahrenheit goal to be not very scientific. Okay, now just a clarification. Those numbers are not in Nordhaus's book because he writes everything in Celsius and Saito converts everything to Fahrenheit. But the claim that Nordhaus sets the tipping point at 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit, that's on page 76 of Nordhaus's book. That's at the end of chapter 6, From Climate to Impacts, where he sets the tipping point at an increase of 3 degrees Celsius, and so that corresponds to 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, he contrasts his estimations with the international meetings that have agreed to a global maximum target of 2 degrees Celsius. And some scientists have even argued that dangerous limits will be triggered if temperatures increases surpass 1.5 degrees Celsius. Like for him, for Nordhaus, these assumptions of the international meetings and these other scientists aren't very scientific. And so Saito doesn't say where in the book he says that the 2 degrees Celsius isn't very scientific, but it's on page 200 in the 17th chapter. It's right at the beginning of the section titled The Scientific Basis of the 2 degrees Celsius target. And so for him, there is no scientific basis for that target, and he rejects the consensus that sets the tipping point at that target, okay, which would be 35.6 Fahrenheit, and that's for example the target set by the Paris Agreement in 2016. So Nordhaus is rejecting even the target set by the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement says that we should remain between 34.7 and 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Because like Nordhaus himself knows, many scientists argue that 35.6 is dangerously high and should instead set the tipping point at 34.7. So we are very far from Nordhaus's 38.3. So why would Nordhaus think that 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit is a more reliable target. Well, that's because he's an economist, and economists only care about one thing: their economic formula succeeding in generating profit. Sure, at 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit, the economy can still be on its feet, but what about the lives of people that won't be able to live if temperatures raise to that level? Nordhaus doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit about them. Because those who are the most likely to suffer from the 38.3 degrees Fahrenheit, he says, are people who don't contribute a lot to the economy anyways. Those are the people who live in the global south, because it is in those zones that global warming will manifest in its most destructive forms. But that wouldn't be a problem for the North, who thrives on economic growth. As Saito says, a rise in average temperatures, a rise in average global temperatures of 38.3 Fahrenheit or more would, of course, result in catastrophic damage, especially in the global south, including African and Asian countries. However, the contribution such countries make to the global GDP is small. Agriculture would, of course, sustain serious damage, but agriculture makes up a mere 4% of the global GDP. A mere 4% isn't much, right? No matter if the damage extends to people who live in these African and Asian countries. This is the line of thought propagated by the researcher who won the Nobel Prize in economics. So yes, if temperature gets to that target, to Nordhaus's target, that will destroy many agricultural activities from which 2.7 billion people depend on for their livelihoods, which is a third of the global population. So let's hear that right. Nordhaus's views end up supporting the idea that it is okay to throw away the lives of a third of humanity just because they only contribute to 4% of the global GDP. That's what it means for a bank to award a Nobel Prize. The lives of 30% of all humans aren't worth losing the economy. And so this is what's really being spread into the mainstream. The message isn't like we said, now we've become aware and responsible. No, the message is, yes, we will sacrifice you without hesitation if it is necessary for making a profit. So this becomes the trend of environmental economics under the influence of people like Nordhaus. When environmental limits and resource scarcity are taken into consideration, it's not in the way we need them to be taken. Environmental economics, if it is a serious discipline at all, it should seek what is best for nature and society, as in, respecting natural limits and natural resources for the benefits of everyone, not just for the rich or those living in the global south, in the global north. Now, to be sure, that's what economists want or claim to want. They want what is best for nature and for society, but for them, what is best for society means what is best for the economy. We've established that if the economy isn't growing in their worldview, then it means that society is crumbling. So you can easily see the fallacy. For them, sacrificing 30% of humanity, that's not society's crumbling. No, it's losing their ability to make a profit that makes societies crumble. When they recognize that there are limits, that nature has limits, and that there is scarcity of resources, it is only insofar as they can extract the most possible value from it. So Saito says, calculating optimal distribution according to limits and scarcity is the special province of economics as a discipline. The goal is to create a win-win solution for from this calculation that would benefit both nature and society. But by optimal, he means a distribution that allows for profits to be made. That's the win-win situation. It's not a situation in which nature and society get what they need. No, it's a situation in which only the economy gets its win-win, and economists get to, raise their profile among international organizations and to the public eye. They just pretend that everything is fine, that they crack the code and have it under control, just to reassure us on the one hand and get privileges and prizes from prestigious organizations. So that's why in the media we keep hearing the buzzwords SDGs and ESG measures. That stands for environmental, social, and governance. We keep hearing these buzzwords to encourage more sustainable and ethical business models and investment, but in reality nothing is seriously done to combat climate change. Temperatures are still rising and GHG emissions continue to rise every year, and we have already reached 33.98 degrees Fahrenheit already. So the kind of policies that emerge from people like Nordhaus are lackadaisical. They are carelessly lazy because they make us believe that solving the climate crisis is easily done so long as, the economy is doing well. In reality, however, the climate crisis isn't solved at all because it is against world governments' interest to do so. The interest of governments, of banks, of multinational companies is economic growth, not the fate of the people or the planet. What's in their best interest is to put off dealing with the problem at hand. This is shown, for example, when we see how governments actually respect the Paris Agreement. The agreement, like we said, sets the tipping point at 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but even when world governments talk about ecology, none of them actually respects that mark, because they can't, even if they all abide by the agreement. According to Nina Chesney, mentioned in the fourth footnote in her article Climate Policies Put World on Track for 3.3 degrees Celsius warming, even if all governments respect the measures suggested by the Paris Agreement, the temperatures will still rise up to 37.94 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. So even what is proposed in the agreement exceeds the 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit mark. For a reminder, the Paris Agreement aims to restrict warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial times, but according to Chesney, current policies meant the world was heading for a warming of 3.3 Celsius. That's 37.94 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we continue with the optimal reduction set by the Paris Agreement's proposal measures, by 2100, temperatures will keep rising by 3 degrees Celsius. So yeah, that's a reduction, but that's going back to Nordhaus's estimations, which means loss of tropical coral reefs, the alpine glaciers, Arctic summer ice, sea ice, and perhaps an irreversible melt of Greenland's ice that would drive up world sea levels. The only way Chesney says that we can hope to curb emissions to acceptable levels, meaning to 1.5 degrees Celsius, is by rapid and unprecedented changes in human behavior. Changes in behavior that are incompatible with the kind of behavior that encourages economic growth. Now, it's important that we grasp that the situation that we are in is extremely dire. We are already in the climate crisis, okay? It has already begun. It's not like if we don't act now, in 2050 or 2100, we will enter into the climate crisis. No, we are already in it. As Saito reminds us today, we're seeing events that normally happen once every 100 years. We are seeing such events occurring at least once a year in countries all over the world. Extreme weather events that used to be considered rare are now happening more often due to human-driven climate change. Floods, like the one that hit Pakistan in 2022, where it submerged 1/3 of the country and it killed about 1,700 people. And in Africa, several droughts have had, drought those droughts, they caused massive starvation, leading people to migrate to countries where they are being harassed and oppressed. And so this was described as a 1 in 100-year flood, and it was worsened by glacial melt and by climate change. So you also have wildfires, like the ones that hit California, Australia, and destroyed tens of millions of hectares and caused the death of hundreds of people from 2019 to 2023. We had heat waves, hurricanes, typhoons, like Harvey hurricane in the US in 2017 that brought 1.25 meters of rain to Houston, and an event that was considered statistically almost impossible. And we had Typhoon Haiwan that stroked the Philippines in 2013, one of the most powerful tropical cyclones ever recorded, with winds over 300 kilometers per hour. It killed over 6,000 people. This is not a normal behavior for the planet, okay? Previously rare disasters to become routine like this, with devastating human, ecological, and economic consequences, is not normal. And yet, politicians and influencers like businessmen like Trump or Elon Musk, they call these extreme weather events the new normal. No, it's not normal at all, and things are going to get worse. And the tipping point isn't in 2100 or 2050, it's way sooner and closer. The tipping point is, according to Saito, the point at which a series of rapid changes will occur that will make it impossible to ever return to how things were. And so the rise in temperature will make the planet behave like that. Yes, it is normal when temperatures reach 33.9 degrees Fahrenheit that you end up, with typhoons, floods, and wildfires every year. But what will be the impact of that on not just human life, but on life in general? Saito already says that in June 2020, the temperatures in Siberia reached 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That means in Siberia, in June 2020, the temperature was at 38 degrees Celsius in fucking Siberia. It's the highest temperature ever recorded in the Arctic Circle. That's not normal. Also, we talked about the danger of the Arctic Circle melting, but here's what you risk if that shit melts. First, the Arctic Circle, that's permafrost. Now, permafrost is a permanently frozen soil found in the Arctic, and it contains methane and carbon dioxide, which were trapped in the frozen ground for thousands of years. And the amount of those gases is huge, enough to significantly worsen climate change if it is released. We are talking about 1,400 to 1,700 gigatons of carbon. For comparison, all of human activity since the Industrial Revolution has released around 500 gigatons of CO2. And for the methane, between 30 and 60 gigatons of methane could be released over the next few centuries if warming continues. So that amount, even if only partially released, could cause rapid short-term warming because methane is 80 times more potent than CO2. If just 10% of those gases are released, it's game over. There would be no possible way to break the loop. The release of those gases will increase temperature faster, which leads to an even more release, etc. So that permafrost must not thaw. It must not melt. But it's already happening in Siberia, in Alaska, in northern Canada. Also, permafrost contains large natural mercury deposits, and it is estimated to hold twice as much mercury as all other soils, oceans, and the atmosphere combined. When the ground thaws, mercury can leach into rivers. It can leak into rivers and ecosystems, entering the food chain, and this is dangerous because mercury is a neurotoxin that can accumulate in fish, birds, and mammals, including humans. But wait, there's more shit trapped in that permafrost. Thawing can reactivate long dormant pathogens like ancient viruses and bacteria like the anthrax virus buried in ice and permafrost. In 2016, a 12-year-old boy in Siberia died of anthrax, likely released from a thawed reindeer carcasses infected decades ago. And so scientists fear that ancient viruses, some possibly unknown to modern medicine, might be revived. And lastly, that permafrost is also a habitat for some animal species like the polar bear. Polar bears rely on ice, on sea ice to hunt seals. As ice melts earlier and freezes later, they lose access to food and are forced to swim longer distances or scavenge on land. Many polar bear populations are already declining in body mass, birth rates, and survival. The Arctic could be, ice-free in summer by the 2030s and 2040s under current warming scenarios, which can severely endanger the species. And so this is no joke. Once the tipping point is reached, and again, it is closer than we think, it will set off a chain reaction of crises, like dominoes falling, unable to be stopped by human hands. And according to Saito, the point of no return is set at 34.7 degrees Fahrenheit. He says, therefore, to prevent this catastrophe, scientists recommend that average global temperatures must not rise above 34.7 degrees Fahrenheit, more than pre-industrial revolution levels by 2100. But as we mentioned, we are already at 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit. The speed at which temperature is rising by 2100 will be far beyond that 34.7 mark. We need to halve emissions by 2030 and reach a net zero by 2050. Yes, you heard that right. By 2050, human activity must stop throwing GHG in the atmosphere. Otherwise, by 2030, we'll already reach the 34.7 mark, and by 2100, we'll be at 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit, so well beyond Nordhaus' already dangerous ceiling. And as I said, even if we follow the Paris Agreement, temperatures will still exceed what the Earth and life can actually endure. So he says about the Paris Agreement, about the measures of the Paris Agreement, they will still result in a rise of 37.76 degrees Fahrenheit over pre-industrial levels by the end of this century, a rise that is close to Nordhaus's model favoring technological advancement and economic growth as the most efficient way to combat climate change. But let's make one thing clear. Setting the tipping point at 34.7 doesn't mean that as long as we don't reach that point, we can keep going we keep doing what we are doing. All the extreme weather events we mentioned happened already, and we are not even at the 34.7 mark yet. So it means that even if the temperatures just rise at 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit, things are not okay for many people. But most of them are in the global south, which for people like Nordhaus isn't a big loss. We will go back to that, but we should also point that climate change doesn't just threaten people living in the global south, but also those who live in developed countries. Sure, many won't care about Pakistan or the Philippines or any African countries, but even countries like the US and Saito's Japan will be affected as badly. Like he said, no one can think that they can emerge unscathed from this, developed or developing countries alike. Saito mentions the torrential rainfall that hit Japan in 2014. The damage exceeded 1,200 billion yen, and since then, torrential rainfalls have, been happening in Japan every year. Also, even if now the global north is doing better than the global south, it doesn't mean that the current temperatures will not affect the global north in the future. With 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit, we're already witnessing the thawing of the ice sheets at the pole. And so that thawing, that is happening today will in 80 years lead to devastating rises in ocean levels. And those rises will hit American cities like New York and San Francisco, and many of their famous landmarks will be submerged. For example, San Francisco's world-renowned Fisherman's Wharf will be completely underwater, and the One World Trade Center in Manhattan will be reachable only by boat. Of course, that would first require the destruction of many global south countries and land, but the damage that we are doing now will, reach those pristine cities in the future without the need to rise temperature beyond the 34.7 mark. And if it exceeds, like if it reaches 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, that means the extinction of coral. That's a serious blow to the fishing industry that not just, the south, but also the north depends on. Typhoons and hurricanes, as well as wildfires and heat waves already affect places like California and Australia, destroying not only wildlife, but even harvests. So yeah, no one should think that they will be spared no matter where they live. Sooner or later, everyone will be confronted with food shortages, having to evacuate their homes, and of course, governments will try to tear those people apart under the pretext that they cannot sustain them. The damages are global, and this is why we must act. As he says, at the global scale, the number of people who would have to evacuate their current homes is in the hundreds of millions. The global food supply would no longer be able to support the population, and economic damage would also be serious. Some calculate the cost at upward of 27 trillion annually. This kind of damage would continue indefinitely. So, this is a crisis that won't spare anyone, whether in the north or the south. But of course, we have to stress whose responsibility is this. And I think it's pretty clear. Not only is the global south more vulnerable and exposed to these weather catastrophes than the north, but it's also the north who is responsible for this situation. Of course, most of the responsibility of climate change falls squarely on the shoulders of those of us living in the global north. So how is that? Well, we can start by looking at a figure which is from a report by Oxfam. It's a British confederation of 21 charity NGOs focusing on alleviating global poverty. Saito mentions them briefly for an important statistic, but he doesn't give the source. But I found it. It's from a 2020 report called Confronting Carbon Inequality. So it's a report that shows the disparities in terms of carbon emissions based on wealth. As you can see in this figure about the share of cumulative emissions from 1990 to 2015, the richest 10% of the planet's population, which is 630 million people, they are responsible for 52% of the total emissions of GHG worldwide. And the 1%, that is 63 million people, responsible for 15%. And by contrast, the middle 40% of the population are responsible for 41%, and the poorest 50% only responsible for 7%. This means that the richest 1% of the global population emitted in 2019 as much CO2 as the poorest 66%. So clearly it isn't the poorest which make half of the population that are responsible for most emissions. Just the 10% richest lifestyle already put an enormous burden on the planet to provide their fast cars, their private jets, their large houses, their meat, their wine, for their freaky parties. Just for the satisfaction of the desires of a small minority, we need a huge amount of resources and energy to be wasted, resources and energy that the future generations need. So we are actually taking away what our children and grandchildren need for the benefits of a small minority. This is for Saito unforgivable because we are robbing future generations of what sustains them. But let's also be clear that it's not just the 10% who are the sole responsible for this, but everyone who participates in the capitalist economy, especially the global north. The 40% are mostly in the global north, so basically the global north is responsible for 93% of the total emission. However, you may say that this is incorrect by looking at the next chart in Saito's book from the Energy Conservation Center in Japan from 2017. Here we have a graph where China is the leading heat-polluting country in the world, releasing up to 28.2% of CO2 emissions, and India 6.6%. The USA, Russia, and Japan, which are respectively responsible for 14.5%, 4.7%, and 3.4%. As for other countries, which make 42%, 42.6%, the European Union makes only 6.6%. Canada and Australia make around 1.2%. So in total, this means that the global north is responsible for 33 to 34% of total CO2 emissions, whereas the south is responsible for 67%. So you can easily argue that it is the developing countries that are the most polluting, not the developed ones. So I mean, China is on its own producing more than a quarter of all of CO2 emissions. Well, we will come back to this, because even if at first glance this seems to be the case, we'll see that it's not really, it's more complicated. This is called the Netherlands Fallacy. As I said, we will come back to it. For now, let's just roll with Oxfam's report, from which we deduce that it is the global north that is mostly responsible for CO2 emissions. Okay, so now that we suppose that it is true, where do we go from there? Well, for Saito, it's quite clear. We need to understand why it is the case that the north is responsible for the climate crisis. Well, it's because the north has no interest in stopping climate change, because to stop climate change means throwing away capitalism. We can no longer afford, like bullshit win-win solutions anymore. It's either the planet or capitalism. We don't have time for more wishful thinking, and so we must act now. Now is the time to call for great change, and to concretely bring it about, I propose that this great change should be nothing less than a challenge to the capitalist system itself. So for Saito, all the solutions, like Nordhaus's, are doomed to fail, because what truly causes climate change is precisely what solutions like his are trying to save: capitalism. That's the origins of the environmental crisis that we have now. So let's break it down. We know the cause for climate change is the excessive release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, mainly due to fossil fuel combustion. But the excessive use of fossil fuel is also a sign of the Anthropocene. You all remember what that word means, right? It's the age where human activity has left nothing untouched on the surface of the earth. So, what does fossil fuel combustion, the Anthropocene, and capitalism have in common? Well, Saito's argument is going to be that capitalism inherently leads to an ever-growing demand for more and more consumption, as agents are now forced into ruthless competition to produce more surplus value in order to survive economically. And as such, energy consumption also increases, because we need to produce faster and in bigger quantities to meet the standards for competition. So this requires that we cover more of the Earth's surface, so that we can make sure that no resource is left untouched. So every single thing on the face of the planet has the potential to produce value. So it will be reified and exchanged on a market. And the most optimal way to produce this much and this fast for the sake of extracting value is by burning fossil fuel. Remember that optimal here means optimal for capital. So capitalism leads us to, we have to increase energy consumption, which leads to a spread of human activity, which releases more and more GHG, and at the same time, we destroy the cooling resources of the Earth to make room for more abstract labor. We, for example, destroy rainforests to make the land, to turn the land into, farms to extract more value from it. Problem is, rainforests are like coolers since they absorb CO2. Without them, temperatures rise, and if on top of that we put more GHG in the atmosphere by burning fossil fuel, well, the Earth gets hotter and at a faster rate, which results in the situation we have now. So this is called the Great Acceleration. It's a period in the Anthropocene where a sudden increase in both human activity and GHG emissions explode and keep increasing at faster and faster rate. Now, the Great Acceleration isn't the Anthropocene or its beginning, but its trajectory. For a reminder, Crutzen, who popularized the term Anthropocene, sets the beginning of the Anthropocene in the mid-18th century, so at the start of the Industrial Revolution. And although CO2 emissions have been rising since then, it is only in the 1950s, right after World War II, that they suddenly exploded and kept growing exponentially. They even got a second upshot after the Cold War. And so that's the Great Acceleration, as called by Will Steffen and other researchers belonging to the Australian National University Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions in the 2015 article, The Trajectory of the Anthropocene, the Great Acceleration. So in it, they show the sudden rises in everything from the 1950s to 2010, from the socio-economic trends such as GDP, urbanization, energy use, to the Earth systems trends like GHG emission, ocean acidification, tropical forest loss, terrestrial biosphere degradation, etc. For example, so here you can have some stats. The global GDP, for instance, increased from approximately $5 trillion in 1950 to over $55 trillion by 2010. The world population doubled from 2.5 billion in 1950 to nearly 7 billion by 2010. Primary energy use tripled during the same period, growing from around 100 exajoules to over 500 exajoules. Urban population rose from 0.7 billion to more than 3.5 billion, with the world crossing the urban majority threshold around 2008. The number of motor vehicles climbed steeply, from fewer than 100 million to more than 1 billion. Fertilizer use, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they exploded from 20 million tons to around 180 million tons. Water withdrawals tripled from about 1,100 kilometer cube to over 3,500 kilometer cube. On the Earth system side, well, you had the atmospheric CO2 concentration rose from 310 ppm to 390 ppm, methane from 1080 ppm to 1800 ppb, and nitrogen dioxide from 275 to 320. Surface temperatures warmed by nearly 0.6 degree Celsius between 1950 and 2010, while ocean acidification increased markedly due to higher CO2 absorption. Tropical rainforest, they declined steadily, while the era of domesticated land plateaued, indicating intensified land use. Meanwhile, average terrestrial species abundance declined by more than 30% since 1970. It's also important to stress that the OECD countries, the member nations of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which is an international organization founded in 1961 to promote economic growth, free markets, democracy, and international trade among advanced economies. So these countries, despite representing just 18% of the global population in 2010, they accounted for 74% of the GDP, which highlights a deep historical inequality. And as you can guess, most of them are global north countries. So we will go back to these inequalities and the impact the north has on global warming. So anyway, so these figures, they underscore that the great acceleration is not just a spike in numbers, but a qualitative transformation in the relationship between capitalist economy or economic activity and the biophysical functioning of the earth. For Saito, these increases in GHG and human activity, they put such a burden on the planet that it cannot keep going on forever. The Anthropocene has a limit beyond which it has only self-destruction ahead. So like Stefan and his colleagues stress, this great acceleration cannot keep going on forever. So clearly there is an intrinsic relationship between globalized capitalism and environmental destruction. We will now look at this relationship in closer details. But before seeing the nature of that relation, it's important to stress again who is mostly affected by it: the global south. If there is somewhere in the world where we can see the contradictions of capitalism, it's there. It lies in the fact that the wealth and growth of the global north depend on the systematic exploitation of the global south's labor, resources, and environment, while externalizing the resulting social and ecological costs onto those same regions. We will come back to externalization. For now, let's just say that for those richest 10% and the rest of the medium 40%, to enjoy their lifestyle in the north, they need to exploit the labor and resources of the other 50% in the south, which destroys their environment and leave them exposed to most weather catastrophes. And on top of that, the south has to deal with it. The global south must bear the cost of the global north's lifestyle. You can think of the oil spills in Mauritius and Venezuela, and the wildfire devastating the Amazon rainforest precipitated by the spread of multinational agribusiness, the collapse of dams in Mexico and Brazil, which resulted in multiple deaths. These are all happening in the global south to sustain a certain lifestyle in the northern hemisphere. Saito mentions the 2015 and 2019 dam collapse in Brazil, in Brumadinho, I think that's how it is pronounced. So there was a tailings dam that collapsed on January 25th, 2019. So tailings are the waste left behind from processed ore. So ore is a natural rock from which we can extract metals such as iron, and Brazil is abundant with ore. So the tailings that are left from the process of extracting iron from ore or other metals, so that process, the tailings take the form of a of a slurry. A slurry is a mixture of water, of crushed rocks, chemicals, and toxic byproducts, and then that slurry is stored in large, what we call tailings dams. So these dams can pose a serious environmental and safety risk if they fail, as they may release, massive amount of toxic sludge into surrounding ecosystems and communities, polluting rivers and causing huge health problems. And that's exactly what happened in both 2015 and 2019. In 2015, a tailings dam collapsed and caused hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic slurry to engulf a nearby village in its flow. And then in 2019, the tailings dam of another iron ore mine near Brumadinho, I think it's called Córrego do Feijão, I think that's how it is pronounced. Anyways, this other dam also collapsed and released a torrent of muddy slurry, which buried the surrounding area, resulting in the death of over 250 people and 16 other missing. At note 6, Saito refers to an article by journalist Amanda Jassy. I think I don't know how it is pronounced, but I'm just gonna call her Jassy. It's titled, Dam Collapse Tragedy Could Have Been Prevented. So if you go to the webpage of that article, you will find a YouTube clip from The Guardian, the newspaper, with the dam actually collapsing and releasing all of the slurry that covers the region like lava. And guess what? Both of those dams were owned by Vale. I think that's how it is pronounced, Vale or Vale, V-A-L-E. So it is one of the top 3 resource exploitation private companies in the world. And when Jassy says that this tragedy could have been avoided, it's because it's not an accident at all. A report by Brazil's National Mining Agency, the ANM, found that Vale had withheld critical safety data and knowingly downplayed structural problems to avoid stricter oversight. For instance, emergency level water pressure readings and unusual material detected during drainage work were never reported to regulators. Field inspectors within the company flagged percolation and instability, but these warnings were downplayed or falsified in reports submitted to the INM. Add to that, only 8 technicians were responsible for inspecting 425 dams in the entire country of Brazil, meaning Vale's compliance was based on self-reporting, something the company repeatedly abused. In fact, 2 weeks before the disaster, a warning email was sent to upper management describing the dams as being at their limit, and Vale's CEO reportedly dismissed the email and even called the email sender a cancer, and even pursued the email sender's identity. That guy, by the way, became the CEO of Vale in 2017, 2 years after the 2015 Samarco Dam, co-owned by Vale and BHP Billiton, which collapsed due to design flaws, killing 19 people. So after the collapse, criminal charges were filed against 13 individuals, including Vale's employees, and its contracted safety auditor for fraud, environmental violations, and the use of falsified documents. So evidence also emerged that Vale systematically pressured auditors into certifying unsafe dams and replaced firms that refused to comply. So these facts confirm what Saito emphasizes, that the disaster was not bad luck but man-made catastrophe driven by the systematic logic of profit maximization under capitalism. But some can still object. Some can say, well, is it relevant to say that the dams were owned by private companies? Can we say anything relevant about capitalism from this? So what if it was owned by private companies? Like, accidents happen all the time, even if they were the result of negligence and fraud, because even public infrastructures can collapse from either sheer luck or because of negligence. I mean, these things happen. In the article, even Jassy at the end, the last sentence says that Vale and Vale's auditor, Tuvsud, I think that's how it is pronounced, they both have said that they are cooperating with the authorities. So can we just say that these disasters can also be the result of bad luck? I mean, having corrupt individuals is also part of luck, in the sense that we cannot blame the capitalist system for it. We just got unlucky with corrupt individuals. Well, no, we can't, because these disasters are not bad luck. No matter how you define bad luck, these instances are proof that capitalism cannot work, because those catastrophes could have been avoided, not if the CEO wasn't corrupt, but if those companies weren't trying to do what companies do, cut costs to increase their profits. This doesn't mean that states don't do the same thing. You can even argue that many ecological disasters were caused by the state's willful negligence. But the difference is that it isn't an inherent feature of the state to take such risks, because the state doesn't try to maximize profits. Since states don't try to maximize profits, it doesn't make sense for them to try to cut costs. But states, however, do work with private companies, making them complicit in the disaster. But here, the role of the state isn't capitalism itself, like it's not trying to raise profit for itself like any other company. Rather, it is to provide the necessary support so that the private companies can make a profit. So the point that Saito is trying to make is that private companies, since they are always trying to maximize profit, they will always opt for the cheaper option. Always. So what happened with Val isn't some 1 in 1,000 type of catastrophe. It's a catastrophe that could have been avoided if Val accepted that it has to sacrifice its profits. As he says, the danger that such accident would occur was repeatedly pointed out by experts, workers, and the people living in the area. And yet, government and industry prioritized cost-cutting over developing effective measures to prevent the disaster. These are entirely predictable disasters known as man-made disasters. So in note 7, he gives another essay by Brazilian researchers, Bruno Malines and Rodrigo dos Santos. It's called The Construction of the Disaster and the Privatization of Mining Regulation, Reflections on the Tragedy of the Rio Doce Basin, Brazil. So this essay precisely delves into this complicity between private companies and states. Because states with neoliberal policies or politics solely rely on private enterprise to grow their economies, they must not delay economic activities of these enterprises by imposing on them safety regulations and inspections. This is part of the ethos that private companies are more efficient than the state because they always act faster, and hence they need their freedom to act, which if it is slowed down by the state, it results in profit losses. And then the state cannot brag in front of other states with their growing GDP graphs. So Brazil needs to compete with other developed countries whose GDP is high, and so it tries to delay the least its private businesses. Hence, it decides to give away all natural resources, thinking that it will rapidly make its GDP grow. Otherwise, it won't be able to compete in the big league. So it is by necessity that it privatizes its natural resources and tries to limit the inspections or impose strict safety regulations. So these disasters don't just happen, they are structurally produced by the transformation of mining regulation in Brazil, a shift from weak state oversight to a regime of self-regulating dominated by the mining companies themselves. In the case of the 2015 Samarco Dam collapse, co-owned by Val and BHP Billiton, public regulators had already proven too under-resourced and politically dependent to enforce meaningful environmental standards. Instead of refusing or delaying licenses, regulators repeatedly approved dam expansions even when official reports noted overcapacity and risks. The licensing system was fragmented and heavily influenced by corporate sectors, while environmental impact assessments were conducted by firms hired by the companies themselves, which is a clear conflict of interest. So after the disaster, the creation of the Renova Foundation, a private entity run by the companies themselves and nominally overseen by state actors, they exemplified a deeper trend. Disasters are followed not by strong regulation, but by further privatization of responsibility. So, crucially, affected populations were excluded from drafting or overseeing the post-disaster agreement, and even the auditing firms assigned to monitor Renova were selected from among the company's preferred corporate service providers. So in this model, the state becomes an enabler and legitimizer of private rule, blurring the lines between governments and business. Disasters then are not failures of an otherwise functioning system, they are part of how the system functions. So many of the disasters happening in the global south are not natural disasters. They are man-made, and they are made by private companies owned by people from the north who exploit the resources of the south and who go there because it is cheaper and because, well, the resources are there. But the most despicable thing is that they are aware of the risks and the dangers for the local populations. Hence, they are responsible for it, especially when they were warned by those they don't want to listen to because they didn't want to lose their profits. So, all of those deaths and those damages to ecosystems could have been avoided. And so this also counts for the disasters that are not man-made, like the dam collapses, for example, hurricanes or acid rains. True, they're not caused by direct actions, like a factory owned by some rich white guy from a northern country spilling its waste in the local river, but they are the product of changes in the Earth's system, and those changes are man-made. They are GNG emissions caused by the capitalist economic activities and lifestyle of the global North. But the question remains, why should the North even care about these disasters since they are happening in places that are far away? Well, besides the fact that the North is responsible for it, and when we say the North, we don't just mean owners of big businesses or powerful politicians. We don't just mean that top 10%, but everyone who lives in the North is one way or another complicit in it. The North should care because these disasters happen there too. Saito mentions the oil spills also happen in Russia, but also too many catastrophes in the USA. The 2020 dam collapses in central Michigan caused by excessive rainfall. There's also the Keystone Pipeline oil spill in 2022 and the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio in 2023. All of these happened for the same reason, similar to what happened in the South. It's because, as he says, these are classic cases of the capitalist push for profit at all costs, leading to climate catastrophe and lasting consequences for the health of local populations. So in May 2020, heavy rainfall caused the Edenville Dam to fail, which then led to the failure of the Sanford Dam downstream. And so this triggered massive flooding in the city of Midland and the surrounding areas, displacing around 11,000 residents with the risks of polluting and contaminating the local water supply with dioxins. The Edenville Dam, by the way, had previously had its federal license revoked in 2018 due to safety violations, particularly its ability to handle major floods. The dam was owned by the Boyce Hydro, which had a long record of violations. And in 2018, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, the FERC, FERC, revoked Boyce's license, citing its failure to upgrade the dam to withstand major floods. So instead of making costly repairs, Boyce continued to operate or neglected the dam altogether. On December 7th, 2022, the Keystone Pipeline, operated by TC Energy, spilled approximately on 14,000 barrels, so that's 588,000 gallons of crude oil into Mill Creek. And so the Keystone Pipeline has a history of leaks and safety issues, raising concerns even before it was built. So TC Energy pushed for rapid construction and resisted stricter environmental reviews, arguing that delays hurt profitability. And on February 3rd, 2023, a freight train owned yet by another private company, Norfolk Southern, derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, with several cars carrying toxic chemicals. A controlled burn of vinyl chloride was conducted to prevent an explosion, releasing toxic gases like phosgene and hydrogen chloride. Residents were evacuated, and later they faced health concerns, environmental contamination, and distrust in official assurances. The incident raised national alarm over rail safety regulations and corporate responsibility. Norfolk Southern lobbied heavily against stricter rail safety regulations, including a rule that would have required modern braking systems on trains carrying hazardous materials. The train that derailed did not have the advanced brakes, even though it was carrying toxic chemicals. And as if that wasn't enough, Northern Southern had even cut thousands of workers in prior years under a strategy called precision schedule railroading, a system designed to maximize efficiency and profits by minimizing labor and equipment costs. So all of these disasters have the same reasons. Private companies don't want to lose profits. So the most vulnerable people living in the North also suffer from the same problems many people in the South already face. Yet people in the North don't rebel against this. And that's because they too think that it's not a huge price to pay in order to save their lifestyle. I mentioned a certain lifestyle in the North earlier, and this is the time to address it. Because most of the things that people enjoy in the North are and are willing to accept all of these weather and environmental catastrophes, they all accept it for this lifestyle. And the things that make this particular lifestyle, all of them come from the South. In any case, the iron in our cars, the gasoline they consume, the cotton woven into our clothes, the beef in our gyudon bowls, these are the things that come to us from these distant places. Our rich lifestyles would be impossible without the plundered natural resources and exploited labor power of the global South. The gyudon, I don't know how it is pronounced, but the gyudon bowl, that's a Japanese beef-based dish. So, because that northern mode of living requires that we exploit far places in the South, this mode of living is basically imperialism. So, in 2017, two German sociologists, Ulrich Brand and Marcus Wissen, I think that's how it is pronounced. It is spelled W-I-S-S-N. Anyway, so they published a book called The Imperial Mode of Living, Everyday Life and the Ecological Crisis of Capitalism. In Saito, it's mentioned in its original title in German. So what is the imperial mode of living? Well, it's a lifestyle that we just talked about. It highlights the lifestyle of people in the global North that is based on the extraction of energy and natural resources from the global South. And so Saito, borrowing Brand and Weissen's definition, defines the imperial mode of living as such. The imperial mode of living refers essentially to the societies of the global North that rely on large-scale production and consumption. This is what makes our rich lifestyles possible. Beneath the surface, there exists a structure by which the cost of our consumption is extracted from the lands and labor of the people of the global South. Without the exploitation of others who pay the cost, the imperial mode of living would be unsustainable. Lowering the standards of living for those in the global South is a prerequisite for the workings of capitalism, and the power imbalance between North and South is no anomaly. It is, in fact, a result of the system functioning normally. So, we see from this that exposing the people in the global South to the risks we saw with the dam collapses, this isn't a bug in the system. It's a necessary feature because without it, this imperial mode of living wouldn't be sustainable. And let's be clear about this. As the title of the book suggests, the imperial mode of living isn't the lifestyle of the ultra-rich or those 10% richest. It's the daily lives of the huge majority of people in the global North or in the regions in the global South, but that try to resemble or adopt the same lifestyle. So, in the third chapter of the book, called The Concept of the Imperial Mode of Living, the authors, they put an emphasis on two things to understand this mode of living: on everyday practices and on social structures. So everyday practices like going on holiday, driving, or just even walking in a nice park, nutrition, water or energy consumption, and other areas of everyday life, these are primarily shaped by habits, by routines, by rules of daily life. These also include ideologies and simple things that we don't usually think about, like immediate perceptions, affects, and emotions, as well as guiding themes such as preeminence of consumerism, eating meat, and private car ownership. So these simple, small gestures are part of social structures that make them deeply problematic as they perpetuate a mode of living that is imperialistic. It means that for us to be able to practice these, to do these everyday tasks or behaviors, we need to plunder the resources and exploit the labor of a periphery just like an empire does. Of course, we don't think of ourselves that we are plundering resources or exploiting someone when we drive our private car or when we eat meat. These tasks are almost done unconsciously out of routine and habit, or more exactly, the reproduction of the social structure between the core and the periphery is reproduced unconsciously, but of course the tasks that we perform are conscious. But it is those structures that make our conscious decisions in the first place. They are what they call, the authors, they call our unconscious preconditions for conscious actions. For example, and this is an example that they use, buying a car. To the individual purchasing a car, that can seem like a result of a logical, calculated decision. It has a cost-benefit analysis. The buyer considers the cost of the car versus the benefits it offers, convenience, time saved, flexibility, status. It has practical reasoning. I need to go to work on time. The bus doesn't go where I live, or owning a car will save me time, etc. So it can also have aspirational reasoning, like I've worked hard so I deserve it, or a car reflects my independence and success, or social comparison. Everyone else I know has a car and it makes their lives easier, so I should get one too. So this framing makes the purchase seem like a free, rational, and even responsible action by an autonomous consumer. But this decision is deeply shaped by broader social, political, and cultural conditions. These can include infrastructure, favoring cars, for example, over public transit. Many cities are built for cars, like roads, highways, suburbs, making walking or public transit inefficient or almost impossible in some cities. You can have government subsidies because policies may favor automotive industries due to economic lobbying or employment dependencies. You can have cultural ideas like freedom or masculinity, like cars in advertising are marketed not as tools but as symbols of, symbols of power, of independence, of virility, of adulthood. Particularly for men, car ownership can be tied to ideas of control, autonomy, dominance, or freedom. And so the car is linked to a sense of freedom or the open road, even if it traps the owner in debt or traffic. So these external forces they make car ownership seem logical and normal, even though they obscure the structural inequalities, and forms of violence that support this system. It's like you are aware of what you do and what you consume, but not of what you are perpetuating when you do that. So most things we consume necessitate that somewhere we have downgraded to the point of the unbearable the lives of some people. In the 8th note, Saito refers to page 64 and 65 of Brand and Weissen's book, but in the German edition. If you have the English version, the passage is at the end of the section Externalization, in also the 3rd chapter. And so the reason why we perpetuate these structures unconsciously is because of this thing called externalization, which is also one of the unconscious preconditions. Externalization means that the cost of sustaining that mode of living in which you claim to be in control of your decisions are put on someone else far away. Everything comes from elsewhere, and the burdens are externalized to that elsewhere, making the violence we just mentioned invisible to you. At the end of the section on externalization, they mention a passage from an American sociologist, Eric Olin Wright, from his book Envisaging Real Utopias, which speaks about the systematic pressure on profit-maximizing firms to generate negative externalities. That means that in order to make a profit, you need to make someone else bear its costs for you. That's an externalization. So the buyer isn't directly confronted with the pollution or exploitation behind the car that he just purchased. So that's quite simple. In order for people in the global north to enjoy the standards of living that they have, the people in the global south must lower theirs to the point where they have to live in inhumane conditions. Why? Well, because everything that is, consumed in the north cannot be produced by capitalism without having to exploit the labor forces that it produced. The labor forces that produced it, sorry. So capitalism, for a reminder, needs to produce a lot, even though, as we will see, it's wrong to say that, because capitalism doesn't produce abundance but scarcity. But we will come back to that. We will come back to that in chapter 6. For now, let's just roll with the standard narrative. Capitalism produces a lot, but the quantity it produces is only possible if we reduce the costs of that production to the maximum. What that means is that for something to be produced abundantly and for the sake of maximizing profits, it must be produced using the cheapest possible way. That's where people in the global south come in. They're the cheapest labor force because you can make them work in the worst possible conditions. You don't need to pay for safety measures to avoid work accidents. You can make them work in extreme conditions, like, for example, poor farmers in India who have to cultivate cotton in an oppressive 104 degrees Fahrenheit heat. That's 40 degrees Celsius. You can put them through that shit just to get some cotton that you will then take to Bangladesh to make workers produce fashion clothes from that cotton in even harder and extreme conditions. Quite often these people work in poorly sustained buildings, just like the dams owned by Vale, and many end up collapsing on those workers, by the way. Saito mentions the famous incident of 2013 at the Rana Plaza in Dhaka, where a huge building that housed 5 garment factories collapsed, resulting in more than 1,000 deaths. And the people who produced those clothes weren't even going to wear them. They were all going to get imported to the north, imported by the north. So not only that, but the growing demand in fashion leads fashion companies to demand more cotton from those poor farmers. Not only this requires them to work more for longer hours, meaning that they have to lower even more their standards of living so that the companies can still make a profit out of this growing demand, but they have to also use genetically modified cotton plants that produce more cotton than the traditional natural ones. This, of course, makes the farmers even more vulnerable, as many cannot afford these plants that you have to buy, of course. And also you need to buy their medicine because they can get sick fast since they're not adapted to the soil. So they end up losing possession of their own seeds and therefore their own autonomy. They get in crippling debt, because they must borrow the money to purchase those new artificial seeds, the fertilizers and pesticides every year, because many of those modified seeds are made so that the fruits they produce are sterile. Yeah, you heard that right. The plants that grow from those modified seeds don't make seeds. So you need to buy new ones every year. And if your crops fail because there was a drought or a heat wave that are more and more common now due to global warming, the farmers cannot pay back their debt because they couldn't sell anything due to the drought. As a result, they need to borrow more money to sustain themselves, which I don't know if you ever found yourself in those situations where your debt keeps growing and growing, but usually it doesn't end well. Many farmers end up committing suicide. All of this is done for the sake of meeting a demand that comes from the global north. At footnote 9, Saito refers to the documentary film The True Cost, by Andrew Morgan in 2015. It's a documentary about the real cost of our clothes, that behind, the $20 t-shirt that we buy. There's the life of the low-wage workers in developing countries. There's river and soil pollution, pesticide contamination, disease and death, etc. By the way, it was the Rana Plaza collapse that inspired him to make the film, and everything we just discussed is reported by Morgan, even the suicide rates among farmers, their debts because they cannot afford to buy the genetically modified cotton. So you can go watch the documentary for further information about the exploitation of people in India by the fashion industry. But from these examples, you can see how in order to produce so many goods that are mostly going to be used by the global north, that requires that the south sacrifices its own standards for a decent life. So this is the imperial mode of living, and everyone in the global north partakes in it one way or another. Most things that you consume in the north, they come from the global south, either entirely or partially. Nothing is 100% made in the north. Nothing of what you consume in the north is made of 100% things from the north. Nothing is made out of resources from the north only. And so in the end, you can say that the standard living of people in the north, the wealth that we see the developed countries brag about constantly, requires that the people living in the south sacrifice their own standards of living. And don't let anyone fool you. These tragedies aren't bugs in the capitalist system. They're integral to it. Capitalism's core is dependent on this contradiction. For some to have high standards of living, many must sacrifice theirs. And not just that, but they are forced into sacrificing their standards, not by physical force, but mostly by the own logic of markets. If farmers find themselves on the verge of suicide, it's not because some physical force is pushing them to accept living in these conditions, although those forces exist and they show up if they dare to speak up against this, but mostly they accept these conditions because they too become dependent on the global north's demand to make a living. In Brazil, the miners knew all of the dangers of the tailings dams because they've been through more than one catastrophe. But many say that they cannot afford not to comply. Many felt that they had to continue mining despite everything, and that they had to live close to the mine. Otherwise, they cannot make the slightest money to make ends meet. And so likewise, the workers at the Rana Plaza, they noticed the irregularities in the walls and pillars. They noticed signs that the buildings are about to collapse or at high risks of collapsing, yet their warnings were ignored, and they had to check in every morning because they couldn't afford not to get that $1. Because yes, most of them are severely underpaid, making less than $1 a day. They kept working, knowing the risks, because they had no choice. As for the farmers in India, they also noticed how harmful to their bodies and the natural world those pesticides are. They were being exposed to toxic chemicals every day and without proper equipment. We don't even need to talk about the damages those pesticides do to the earth and to the ecosystems in those areas. But those fashion industries and agribusiness, they don't care about all that. All they care about is their agenda and meet the demands, and I put demand between in quotation marks, because it's not really a demand if by demand you understand what people freely and naturally would want. If capitalism had to respond to the actual needs of people and of their free, real demand, capitalism cannot work. Instead, it had to create demand to make sure, to make us believe that we need all of the stuff that we own, not even use, so that it can extract value. If it was just content with needs and natural demands, it won't be able to make profits. So they have to make the consumers believe that they need their wardrobes filled with new clothes every season. They apply social pressure so that consumers are constantly insecure about their own status, and so they must rush to buy the latest pair of jeans by Louis Vuitton or the new Gucci bag or whatever. So all of this is to say that industries and businesses don't care about the tragedies we just mentioned. All they care about is their profit margins. So they have to push people to their deaths and that's how they can make a profit. So this is slavery. This is straight up slavery. And again, this is no bug in capitalism. If consumers and producers didn't have to enter this blackmailing relationship, then the system wouldn't be capitalistic at all. So as Saito says, the tragedy I've outlined here depends on the normal functioning of global capitalism, just as for structural reasons, the global South depends on the production and consumption that goes into the imperial mode of living. In this way, increases in human and environmental sacrifice result in increases in profit for major industry. This is the logic of capital. Yet, despite these realities, people in the North keep acting like none of it exists. So this would require that we address some psychological features of the people in the North and their psychological strategies for coping, because this is about coping with the reality that they either exploit or partake in exploiting people in the global South, either as owners, producers, or consumers. So it's undeniable that everyone in the North, people in the North feel discomfort when these realities are brought up. This creates a bad consciousness when you realize that you have severely hurting someone, or you participate in that process. Unless you are a psychopath, well, you must feel guilty. Now, normally in those situations, rational people would just stop that, right? They unite to create alternatives so that they don't exploit anyone. But this must come at a price, which is accepting that the lifestyle causing this hurt cannot continue. We have to give up on the imperial mode of living altogether. But what happens when you acknowledge that what you are doing or what you are consuming is hurting others, and at the same time you don't want to stop consuming that? Well, you either must make a choice, make the right one and give up that consumption, or you try to gaslight us into believing that there's a way you can have it both ways. You can keep consuming while pretending that you are not exploiting anyone. And so this is the coping strategy. A way for this coping strategy is charity. People just donate some money to a charity and then they don't have a bad consciousness anymore. You bring it up and they'll be like, here, I gave money to some charity, now leave me alone and don't tell me that I have to change my ways or give up my consumerist lifestyle up. But this coping strategy is only possible because precisely someone has to remind people of what's happening in faraway places. If people in the North see these realities on a daily basis, forgetting about it once you give that small donation would be more difficult, right? So the fact that the sacrifice the global South has to do is invisible reinforces these coping strategies. That's again externalization. And when you push the sacrifice away, when you push it far enough so that no one can see it, that's externalization. So Saito gives a clear definition of the concept, and this time not from Weisen and Brand, but from another sociologist from Munich University, Stefan Lesnich. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. It is spelled L-E-S-S-E-N-I-C-H. And so according to him, externalization is the passing along of costs to somewhere far away and rendering them invisible because of the 24-hour news cycle, and the attention economy is indispensable to the richness enjoyed by societies in the global North. He critiques this tendency, calling it externalization society. Those in the global North enjoy rich lifestyles enabled by the sacrifices of those in the global South. Further, Lesnich points out that those in the global North work to maintain this exceptional status not just for today, but for the foreseeable future. Externalization society refers to the process by which a society tirelessly creates an outside so as to pass along the various burdens necessary to maintain itself. This is the only way our present society has been able to thrive and flourish. So the reference at footnote 10 is Lesnich's book about externalization. Saito gives the reference in German, but if you want to read it in English, its translation is Living Well at Others' Expenses, the Hidden Cost of Western Prosperity. So Lesnich's argument is that the way our societies function necessitates that we exploit and pass on the costs of our living elsewhere. We pass it on people living in the global south. That's why he talks about externalization society. Like externalization is a necessary feature of our societies. It is in its very nature. We can only live well at the expense of others as long as we keep relying on economic growth, of course. The point of Saito's argument is that we can have alternatives for a good life, but that means that we need radical changes in the structures of our society, which means that there are a lot of things we must give up on. But we will go back to that. So in short, externalization society is creating this outside, on which all of the burdens necessary for maintaining the imperial mode of living fall onto. Since these burdens are placed on that outside, those living on the imperialist lifestyle don't see it, and therefore it is easier to ignore it or pretend that a simple donation solves it. But we can go even further to understand this externalization process through the work of another sociologist, Emanuel Wallerstein. Now, Wallerstein has developed what he calls a word system approach to environmental issues. You can find it in his 1974 book, The Modern World System, Capitalist Agriculture and the Origins of the European World Economy in the 16th century. I think that's the whole title. It's not in Saito's footnotes, and he doesn't have a bibliography, but if you want to read Wallenstein, that's the reference. Or you can read his 2004 book, Word System Analysis, an introduction, which Saito refers at the last footnote. So, a word system approach means that you take into account the interaction of all parts of the world instead of just limiting your focus on just one thing. For example, many people today would look at the issues in the South and try to solve them by only focusing on, the South. It presupposes that the problems of the South are simply internal, that the South can emerge from the crisis it faces if it fights off, for example, corruption, if it addresses the kind of cultures it has. And so the issue wouldn't be capitalism or neocolonialism. No, it's those countries themselves. They are not rational enough. They don't value effort, or they prefer just to stay idle. They lack, moral commitment, etc. That sort of bullshit. And what's funny about this is that people who think this way when tackling issues only make this internal criticism to people suffering from the kind of bullshit they rely on. They never make these internal critiques to their own bullshit, right? Like, why farmers suffer in India is because of India. But they never apply this to capitalism. They never recognize the internal contradictions to the capitalist system. Like they would say, yeah, India has many contradictions, yeah, the problem is in India, but they never seem to apply this to the capitalist system itself. Anyway, so to go back to Wallerstein, this word system approach is based on the interaction between a core and a periphery. The periphery is the outside that is both exploited and made to bear the cost of that exploitation. So it stands in a relationship of unequal exchange with the core. The core takes away more than what it gives back to the periphery. And as such, we find an unbalanced exchange, an unbalanced contrast. The core is overdeveloped, while the periphery is underdeveloped. In the non-world system approaches, you would attribute the underdevelopment of the periphery not to this unequal exchange, but to internal problems in the developing countries. In reality, however, things are more complex. The underdevelopment is made on purpose so that the core can keep extracting cheap labor to raise its profits by driving down the prices of goods that cheap labor produces. Now, the driving down of prices means the deliberate reduction of the cost paid for goods and labor, especially those suffered from, especially those sourced from the global south, in order to maximize profit margins for companies and economies in the global north. Capitalist enterprises seek to minimize input costs, including wages, raw materials, and environmental protections, in order to produce goods cheaply and sell them at higher prices. On a global scale, this means that wealthier countries and transnational corporations, they shape trade relations, supply chains, and labor conditions in ways that suppress the prices of goods produced in poorer regions, so much so that the poorer regions are forced into selling their goods at a price that doesn't cover their costs. They're forced to lower their prices if they wish to find a buyer. In other words, northern industries buy from you material at a price lower than what it costs you to produce. A clear example of this is in the global cotton industry. In countries like Burkina Faso or India, small-scale farmers produce raw cotton under harsh conditions, often earning prices so low that they can barely survive. And so these prices are suppressed because of pressure from powerful multinational buyers on which the farmers rely, on subsidies given to global north producers that distort global markets, and because of intense competition among southern countries to export to. So the cotton is then shipped to factories in places like Bangladesh, where workers, also paid very little, they transform it into garments. And so these garments are ultimately sold by Western brands like Zara or H&M at many times their production cost, but those factory workers, they receive almost nothing. And so in this system, the global south provides the labor and materials, but the majority of value and of profit is captured in the global north through marketing, retail, and brand control. So it is an exchange, but unequal, because the value exchanged is structurally imbalanced. The global south consistently provides more labor and resources than it receives in return, due to historically rooted inequalities in bargaining power, in trade rules, and economic dependency. But it is worth noting that this process of unequal exchange between core and periphery cannot go indefinitely. At a certain point, the periphery is exhausted and turns into a barren land, unable to produce anything anymore. There's an actual physical limit to how much value you can squeeze out of labor and out of nature. Once the farmer and his land die, you cannot do anything with either. So what's the next step? Well, you have to move to another periphery, and so on and so forth. This is another feature of how the Anthropocene works, how human activities cover the entire world. But again, there is a physical limit to the planet as a whole. You don't have an infinite number of peripheries. Once you reach beyond every corner of the world, well, capitalism crumbles because it doesn't have any resource to exploit now. And this, by the way, led some thinkers to argue that now capitalism tries to switch to digital space because it seems that it can create another core periphery dynamics there without worrying about physical limits. But even that, we will see, isn't sustainable. But the point is, many believe that in terms of physical limits, capitalism has reached its last frontier. And so we're now looking at the beginning of capitalism's end. Many sociologists and philosophers do actually believe that we are at the end of capitalism, and Saito gives a reference about that in note 11. He gives the book How Will Capitalism Ends? Essays on a Failing System by sociologist Wolfgang Streeck. And that's an interesting choice, because Streeck doesn't mention at all climate change in his book. I mean, he mentions it, but only once. The word climate change appears only once, and only in the introduction, where he does some literary review of theories that explain why capitalism will end, notably Wallerstein's word system theory. For Streeck, the end of capitalism doesn't have to be understood in relation to ecological disasters, because if that thesis is true, that if we accept that growth rates go down because of ecological disasters, then it doesn't mean that capitalism is at its end. The outcome might be just a stable, low growth capitalism with considerable ecological benefits. He says that when he discusses Michael Mann, a scholar who presented several scenarios for the future based on ecological disasters, it's either going to be nuclear war, or we will go back to some sort of 50s to 70s style of capitalism. By the way, that's a position that we will criticize in the next chapter. But anyways, for Streeck, he doesn't believe in that. Not that Mann's theory regarding climate change is wrong. I mean, it is, but it is not why Streeck rejects it. He rejects it for the same reason he rejects Wallerstein's approach to climate change is simply irrelevant for him. The internal contradictions of capitalism will cause the end of capitalism, so he agrees with Wallerstein that it is wrong to think that there is no alternative to capitalism. He agrees that capitalism is just a temporal system that will eventually be replaced by others, but he argues that capitalism's collapse will be due to 5 structural disorders within capitalism. Now, it's unrelated to climate change, like because of stagnation, like persistent low growth, because of oligarchy, like rising inequalities and the concentration of wealth, public indebtedness, like states borrowing to placate voters without taxing capital, corruption, because collapsing trust in institutions enables elites to act with impunity, and 5, because of international anarchy, like a disintegrating global order with no hegemony able to maintain capitalist stability. And so this will lead to the loss of collective political power, both on the right and the left. And so neoliberalism has undermined trade unions, it hollowed out democracy and weakened the capacity for coordinated resistance. And so this absence of an organized opposition, paradoxically, according to Streeck, makes capitalism more vulnerable because it lacks external correctives. And so deprived of all collective power, people develop asocial behaviors, they act opportunistically in a society that can no longer offer meaningful integration. And so he calls this a society light, spelled L-I-T-E. It's a fragmented, under-institutionalized order in which governance breaks down and expectations become localized and short-termed. But this doesn't mean that capitalism is going to end. Rather, for Streeck, capitalism is just going to destroy humanity, because this process of systemic disintegration will lead to a strong interregnum. It means a period of social entropy, of institutional decay, and political paralysis. This is in great contrast with Saito, because this period of social entropy, where capitalism will gradually disintegrate under the weight of its internal contradictions, it won't lead to a Marxist revolution or to socialism for Streeck. It's just going to keep going on forever until we all die, I guess. There are alternatives to capitalism, but it's not like we can save ourselves from it. We're probably going to keep this trend until civilization dies, and then those who survive, maybe whatever will be after that, we will build a new civilization with alternative social systems other than capitalism. So that's a strange note for a reference, because Streeck and Saito only agree about one thing, that we are at We're already at the end of capitalism. We are already in the final phase of capitalism, but they don't agree on the possible outcomes nor the causes for why we are at the end of capitalism. I mean, Saito agrees that it is capitalism's contradictions that are causing its decay, but those contradictions cannot be separated from climate change precisely. And of course, there's a whole, divergence when it comes to communism. But maybe Saito included it just to show that predictions that capitalism is on its deathbed are becoming more and more common among scholars with different approaches and worldviews. But anyways, back to Saito. So Saito is going to be following Wallerstein, but he will have some disagreement with him. He finds a limit in Wallerstein's theory of core periphery dynamic and this unequal exchange between the two. I've already mentioned this limit, by the way, when I said that both the farmer and his land die. Because Wallerstein only considers exploitation's object as human labor. When we exploit, for Wallerstein, it's always other people, not things like land, forests, or oceans. Climate change is like a byproduct of this exploitation, but we don't exploit the earth, nature itself. He still has a one-sided view of how capitalism works. Instead, Saito says we must also include the global environment as another object of exploitation. He says, the object of capitalism's exploitation is not just the labor power of the periphery, but also the environment of the entire earth. Natural resources, energy, and food are all plundered from the global south via unequal exchange with developed countries. Capitalism uses humans as tools for accumulating capital, but can profit from the natural world by simply plundering its resources directly. This is one of this book's most fundamental assertions. Therefore, it is only to be expected that as long as it aims for unlimited economic growth, a global system of this sort will place the world's environment in danger. Still, Wallerstein's work has been, it became deeply influential, and it sparked an entire field of research and approach to inequalities between core and periphery. At note 12, Saito mentions a few essays that precisely use Wallerstein's approach of unequal exchange, but apply to ecological issues and the plundering of natural resources. There's Stephen Bunker's 1984 article, Mode of Extractions, Unequal Exchange, and the Progressive Underdevelopment of an Extreme Periphery, the Brazilian Amazon, 1600s to 1980. Now that article is now a classic about issues related to the Amazonian rainforests in Brazil. Probably the first to apply Wallerstein approach, not just to labor exploitation, but in agriculture, but also to the exploitation of natural resources themselves, and how unequal exchange also takes place between natural zones or natural regions too. But Bunker, and after Bunker and more scholars, adopted an approach focusing on ecologically unequal exchange. And Saito is one of those scholars. For him, value isn't just extracted from labor, but also from nature, from the natural resources themselves, which means that we can also conceive of an unequal exploitation and export of natural resources, as well as between regions, not just between people. So we need to adjust Wallerstein's idea by integrating in the periphery natural resources and say that economic growth doesn't just plunder workers and their labor force in the periphery, but also its natural resources, like it treats the earth, it treats nature like it treats workers, all the while shifting the costs, underlaying this growth back to the periphery, both the worker but also nature itself. So this means, just like the workers must bear the cost of the imperial mode of living by having to work more and live in degrading conditions, the same is asked of nature when its resources are plundered. It too must produce more than it can physically, which leads to exhaustion, and the waning of ecosystems and life forms. It is then left to nature is then left to bear the cost, like workers and farmers bear the cost of externalization. Saito gives the example of palm oil. Now, palm oil is today in all of our food, especially processed and fast foods, because even sweets, because it doesn't oxidize easily. It keeps the food fresh longer. It doesn't spoil quickly, and is cheaper than many alternatives like butter or sunflower oil. And let's not forget that the reason why we now must consume processed and fast food is because it is, well, fast to consume and prepare. It's also fast to prepare, so that people, don't spend much time cooking themselves or enjoy meals together in order to bond, but to quickly go back to work. It's not like, without palm oil, we won't be able to eat and we would starve, right? Plus, palm oil is very cheap to sell and to produce, so it is the perfect opportunity for capital exploitation. And so here's how it works. Most palm oil comes from Malaysia, but since it is used for most of our food, since we now eat more and more processed food, it requires more and more surface for cultivation. So you need to clear a lot of space to plant the palms you use to produce palm oil, and that space has increased exponentially since the beginning of this century. Problem is, Malaysia has tropical rainforests that play an indispensable role in regulating the Earth's temperature. So what do you think happens? Well, the tropical rainforest needs to be cleared to make room to cultivate, palms. So we're talking about rapid deforestation on a huge scale. Like today, 5.61 million hectares are used for palm oil plantation in Malaysia. What do you think the consequences of that would be? First, there are people who are reliant on the rainforests to live or just live in the region, and they feed themselves directly from the rainforest. For example, there are people who live on fish from the rivers of the rainforest. If you clear it to make farmlands, you cause soils to erode, and the fertilizers and agri-chemicals you use release toxins in the stream in which the fish live. So this causes the fish to die, which also means that local villages cannot consume them, which forces them into selling their labor force on those farmlands for money to buy processed food. And so we're back to that exploitation into slavery thing we mentioned. So you had people who were freely capable of sustaining themselves for free. They can directly take, the resources from the forests or from the rivers. You, as a capitalist, you don't like that because you despise the idea that someone can eat without paying money, or that, something was consumed without squeezing value out of it. So you destroy their traditional lifestyle and force them into another lifestyle where they have to work on those farmlands in order to have access to food that was processed from elsewhere, because they can't eat from the polluted rivers anymore. And plus, it's food that isn't good for your health either. And as you can guess, work on those farms is no picnic, and their conditions have actually worsened, and they don't get paid nearly enough anyways. And so this also pushed several of those locals to get involved with illegal trade of exotic species of animals that are critically endangered, like on the brink of extinction, like tigers and orangutans, just to get enough money to buy the processed food. And so if this sounds surreal to you, because for you, processed food isn't expensive, well, don't forget that if for you a burger only costs $5, that's a whole day salary for a typical farmer in zones like Malaysia. So this is an equal exchange. But it doesn't just stop at the disparities between purchase power. The inequalities are also shared in the cost that falls on the people's shoulders. People living in the north don't bear ecological damages as hardly as those in the south. To quote Saito, the damage brought about by the environmental crisis is not borne equally by the global population. The environmental burden tied to the production and consumption of food, energy, and other raw materials falls on the shoulders of some much more than others. So not only people living in the South are cheated into the exchange, they also have to bear most burdens that come with unequal exchange. The same fate falls on the natural world, as the zones from which value is extracted must bear more burden than the zones in the north. For some zones in the north to seem green and pretty, we had to destroy ecosystems elsewhere in the south. We had to erode so many soils, lead so many species to the brink of extinction. Natural zones in the south have then to bear more pressure than those in the north, so that the zones in the north appear cleaner. And the key word here is appear. The convenient lifestyle in the north that seems, inexpensive, clean, pretty, and well-ordered, comes at a price, which is the exploitation of the periphery's labor and the extraction and destruction of its natural resources. This is, again, externalization. Imagine you force someone into overworking labor to the point of near-death exhaustion, so that he produces a huge quantity of food, but not for him, only for you, and then you eat that food and give him back the waste, and for a price. All the shit that you push out of your asshole goes back to him. You externalize all the burdens back to him. So to quote Saito about externalization, he says, as Lesnich, the vocal critic of the global north as externalization society, puts it, the primary condition making our rich lifestyles possible is the passing of these burdens onto the people and natural resources of some faraway place, so that the true cost is never paid by the end consumer. So Lesnich means by externalization society that the global north is a society that sustains itself through externalization. The lifestyle it promotes or lives it buys, it lives by, it can only work if and only if it passes the burdens onto the people and natural resources of that outside. This doesn't mean that the people living in the north are inherently externalizators or externalizers, but their lifestyle is. So they can choose to whether continue into this behavior or change it for the better and for what's better in everyone's best interest, humans but also non-human beings included. Sadly, most of them continue to indulge this lifestyle even though they know the cost. They know that their daily routines perpetuate externalization, but they have their coping mechanisms to feel like, they have a clear conscience. We mentioned charity donations, but there are other ways to deny a wrongdoing. Again, no one in the north actually sees the violence they are producing, since that violence is concretely felt by someone in a faraway land. We just assume that the earth is in bad shape and we must, care somehow, but we don't seem to understand that what it takes is to give up on our lifestyle. Or maybe we do, but prefer not to, so we turn away our eyes, we pretend that small gestures are enough. I donate to a charity, I bought a reusable shopping bag or an organic cotton t-shirt. So again, these are those Catholic indulgences that we mentioned in the first video. You feel like a bad person, so you just go confess, you go confess to a priest. And likewise, you feel like a bad person, so don't worry. All you have to do is just buy your reusable bags. We already pointed to the uselessness of such actions, and that for a simple reason. Everything that you buy, whether it is eco-friendly or not, is sold to you to make a profit, which means that it is not produced to be useful, but to extract value. And as such, companies that produce those eco-friendly products, they need you to always buy more of them. So they treat those products just like we treat any other kind of products. They are in competition with others. They need advertisement and motivate you to always get newer ones. So even if you are constantly being told that you must buy eco-friendly reusable cotton bags, for example, that are way more expensive than plastic ones, companies don't actually want you to reuse them a lot. Only non-profit groups would be coherent to sell you reusable bags. Even if they do, they'd actually try to get you to buy more, that release a bag with, for example, a new design or with the face of your favorite musician or TV show or something. So even if those bags don't pollute like plastic ones and are biodegradable because they are made of cotton, well, how do you think that cotton was made in the first place, right? The problem isn't just what we consume. You don't save the planet and save, the millions of people working in disastrous conditions by simply swapping your objects of consumption. It's the process of production itself that is broken. Anything that is made in order to generate profit can never be eco-friendly. And all it does, is just give you the impression that you are not a polluter, so that you don't have to care about the people buried under the slurry in Brazil or feel bad about them. That's exactly what greenwashing is, making us insensitive to the violence against the people and environments of the distant lands that produced our green products. In reality, those products simply hide the grim reality that each thing we enjoy is just the product of a violence against someone and against nature. But everything is made so that not only we ignore that violence, but that we also become more and more attached to the lifestyle that requires that violence. In the end, ignorance becomes willful. We know that if we become aware of what our lifestyle costs, we won't be able to justify it, and so we become ignorant by choice. We choose not to know about the suffering that we cause, so that the capitalist keeps his profit and we keep our mode of living. To quote Saito, those of us living in the global north are not just compelled into ignorance of the transfer of our lifestyle's cost to the global south. We are also compelled to internalize to an extreme extent the sheer desirability of the imperial mode of living. We hold on to blissful ignorance and are afraid to look directly at the truth. I don't know evolves naturally into I don't want to know. But don't we know deep down that our comfortable lives come at the expense of others forced to live in comparative misery? We merely see this injustice as something that has nothing to do with us, and so we look away from it. We cannot stand to look the truth in the face. So although we know we are the cause of injustice, we secretly want the current order to continue. This is how the imperial mode of living becomes even more deeply entrenched, and our response to the current crisis ends up being put off to a future time that never comes. In this way, each and every one of us is complicit in perpetuating injustice, but the just deserts for this procrastination have already begun filtering back into the core. So, at note 13, Saito gives a reference that unfortunately I couldn't find. It's apparently something he co-wrote with German philosophers, but I couldn't read it, so I couldn't know what is he referring exactly to here. He even gives a page number, but I don't know. So anyways, to go back to the quote, well, I think it's pretty clear. This is what we said earlier. We keep externalizing into the periphery until there is no more room left for further externalization, but then where will the cost be pushed into? It is obvious what's going to happen. The cost will be pushed back into the core because of all of those years of procrastination. So this is where we go back to that idea that we said that we are going to put a pen on. That is the Netherlands Fallacy. We mentioned it when we talked about the amount of GHG produced by countries. I said that the North is mostly responsible for it, but the numbers we saw made it clear that it's actually the global South that is technically producing most of it. So let's unpack this. So another way the global north uses to deny its responsibility in the climate crisis and its impact on the global south is precisely by pointing out that, in fact, developing countries produce more GHG than the developed ones. And so this isn't something new. It's something that we hear constantly since the 70s and the 80s, whenever the question of the North responsibility is brought up. It's also in 1971 that the term the Netherlands Fallacy was coined by the American biologist Paul R. Ehrlich. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. So it is spelled E-H-R-L-I-C-H. So I'm going to just pronounce it Ehrlich or Ehrlich. So anyway, so it was coined by this guy, Ehrlich, and another biologist, John P. Holdren, who later became the science and technology advisor of Barack Obama. Anyway, so the fallacy was coined in 1971 in a paper they published together titled Impact of Population Growth. Problems related to population growth and control are Ehrlich's specialty. He even became famous when he co-authored a book with his wife Anne Howland, which became famous in 1968, The Population Bomb. So the fallacy doesn't appear in the book, but it spells out the logic behind it, and Saito mentions the book at footnote 14, to which we will go back to, but he doesn't mention the 1971 article. So what's the fallacy is about? Well, it started in the early 70s when a debate was going on about a problem related to the unequal utilization of world resources. The debate started out of a concern about population control. Ehrlich was arguing that the population growth that they witnessed in the 1950s, after the end of World War II, so the famous baby boom, leads to overpopulation, which can lead to a situation where we won't have enough resources to sustain that ever-growing population. And so this sparked a debate in which demographers, like for example Ben Wattenberg, argue that the US isn't overpopulated because it has lesser density, population density, than other countries like the Netherlands, which aren't considered overpopulated by international standards. So according to Wattenberg, the Netherlands have a denser population, 18 times higher than the US. And so this means that although the US has more citizens, the concentration of people per square kilometer is less than the Netherlands. But Ehrlich and Holdren argue that it's misleading to think of overpopulation as density. Instead, they argue that we need to think overpopulation as how much of natural resources are consumed by the population. If the population, no matter how many people it has, consumes more than the region can provide and has a significant impact on the environment, well then it's an overpopulation, it's an overpopulated region. But then people can argue that precisely countries like the Netherlands don't consume that much. Or they'll say that even if they do, they're not impacting negatively their environment, and this is the core of the fallacy. Not only countries like the Netherlands consume a lot of resources, if they don't impact their environment negatively, it's because everything that they consume comes from somewhere else. As they say, the Netherlands actually requires large chunks of the earth resources and vast areas of land, but simply not within its borders to maintain itself. For example, it's the second largest per capita importer of protein in the world, and it imports 63% of its cereals, including 100% of its corn and rice. It also imports all of its cotton, 77% of its wool, and all of its iron ore, antimony, bauxite, chromium, copper, gold, lead, magnesite, mercury, nickel, silver, tin, zinc, fertilizers like phosphate rock or potash, and even diamonds. And so this is from the 1971 article. Maybe the number have changed a little bit today, I didn't check, but that's the core of the fallacy. The Netherlands produce energy equivalent to some 20 million metric tons of coal, and yet consumes the equivalent of over 47 million metric tons. That's a lot. The Netherlands put a huge burden on the earth. Yet, the air and water pollution in such a country is comparatively low, and it doesn't produce as much GHG as other countries from the global south. So we seemingly have a contradiction here. We argue that the lifestyle in the north consumes too much of the world's resources, and yet it is the developing countries that contribute the most to GHG emissions, despite having pretty modest lifestyles. And so, according to Saito, some try to explain this by the technological inequalities between the countries. Countries like the Netherlands, well, they are more advanced and have more innovations than developing countries. These technologies are more efficient, and so through them they manage to limit their negative impact on the environment. But of course, the reason why they have these technologies in the first place is thanks to capitalism and free markets, which stimulate innovation through competition. So capitalism works because it allows countries to come up with miracle technologies that reduce and dispose of pollutants that can damage the environment. So this, of course, is bullshit, and it is an ideological claim just to save capitalism. In reality, the reason why the Netherlands produce less GHG than countries like India or China is because they import everything from those faraway places. Developing countries produce more GHG than developed ones because they produce what the developed countries want them to produce for their consumption and get those goods through an equal exchange. In other words, the factories that pollute the most, yes, they are in the global south, but they are owned by private companies and governments in the north. So it is actually the global north that is producing most of GHG. So it simply transfers the burdens and costs of its economic growth to the south, and hence we have the impression that if the global north is clean, it's because of its economic growth. As Saito says, to celebrate the economic growth of developed countries for lessening the pollution in those countries is the essence of the fallacy here, which Nordhaus has fallen into, as seen at the beginning of this chapter. The environmental improvements occurring in developed countries result not just from technological advances, but from passing along most of the negative byproducts of economic development, resource extraction, waste disposal, and the like, outward onto the periphery, represented by the global south. So this is where we have the reference of the population bomb by Ehrlich and Anne Holland, page 22. Now, the thesis of that book is that we are facing a population explosion, which, if it remains uncontrolled, it will lead to worldwide famines due to overpopulation. Now, that sounds like Malthusianism, the idea that population growth can lead to food shortages and to famine. It's named after Thomas Robert Malthus. He was a British economist of the 18th and 19th century, and it is odd to find Saito refer a book that has a similar thesis. That's because, well, Malthus was an enemy of Marx. Because talks about population growth are often used in a reactionary paradigm to undermine all socialist and revolutionary action. It distracts us from the notion of class struggle and instead focuses on demographic control, which only serve as a pretext for the ruling class to maintain its domination. Since the ruling class is the one consuming most resources, it's in its interest to promote these scenarios of there cannot be enough for everyone. So it puts the blame on the poor, since their population is always, growing uncontrollably. And so we can see, communism as being at odds with the thesis in the population bomb, and, Ehrlich and Ann have been met with severe criticism. And now only a very few academics still take seriously Malthusianism or thesis close to his. However, Ehrlich and Ann don't just boil down the word crisis to overpopulation, and they do have a material class-based approach to the relation between overdeveloped countries, the ODCs, and the underdeveloped countries, the UDCs. So they recognize, for example, that the exploding birth rates are unequal between the two. The populations of the UDCs grow faster than the ODCs, while at the same time their conditions deteriorate faster. Countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have growing poverty, disease, famine as their population grows. So in the first chapter, they give the example of Colombia to show how brutal life can be. They mention that an average mother, when you live in a country that doubled its population, she goes through a progression of attempts to limit the size of her family that range from ineffective native forms of contraception to quack abortion to even infanticide to frigidity and all too often to suicide. And so this can be a Malthusian view if they just, left it at that. It could have turned into an analysis that says, it's the UDCs that are responsible for climate crisis because they don't control their population and so they consume all of their resources. The ODCs, however, have less, birth rates. They are demographically responsible. They have better and cleaner technologies. That would be the Netherlands fallacies. The Netherlands fallacy. But instead, the authors argue that this is due to the exploitation of the UDCs by the ODCs. The UDCs, the underdeveloped countries, because of mass poverty and famines, they are less. There is actually less consumption of resources per individual, while the ODCs, there is a huge amount of consumption per individual. And that disparity, how in ODCs people are less numbered but each consumes so much compared to the UDCs where people are so many but each don't consume nearly enough, is actually due to the ODCs plundering the resources of the UDCs. Affluent nations are the main ecological culprits, despite lower or slower population growth. Rich countries displace ecological harm to the poor, which helps them, appear clean and stable. At several passages of the book, they say ODCs consume a disproportionate amount of the world's resources and are the major polluters, not the UDCs. So right from the first pages of the book, they highlight how the United States and other ODCs consume a disproportionate share of the world's resources while offloading pollution and ecological damage. They must, co-op much more than their fair share of the world's wealth of minerals and energy, and they have exceeded the capacity of their environments to dispose of their wastes, so they need to dispose it elsewhere. Hence, the ODCs need to maintain, the UDCs in their poverty so they can dominate them, to turn them into their toilets. So the cleaner environments of affluent nations are sustained by extracting resources and ecological services from poorer nations. Precisely the fallacy of believing, national environmental success is purely internal. So even the overpopulation that the authors talk about and all of its negative effects is actually the result of the core's exploitation of the periphery. So to sum up, the Netherlands fallacy is the following. It is to ignore the international transfer of the burden of environmental impact and to assume that the global north has solved its environmental problems simply through technological advances and economic growth. So the point of the Netherlands fallacy, fallacy is to hide the exploitative nature of the core-periphery relation. The core keeps taking the resources of the periphery to sustain its lifestyle, while leaving the periphery to deal with the cost of such a lifestyle. This is the plunder and cost transfer. It's an essential feature of the Anthropocene. The spread of human activity to the point where it covers the whole world, we've seen, is dependent on capitalism, on the unlimited extraction of value from cheap labor and natural resources. To quote Saito, capital has always strived to extract everything it can, all the oil, all the nutrients from the soil, all the rare metals and so on from the world. This is known as extractivism, and it has placed an enormous burden on the earth. But just as the frontiers needed to gain profits from cheap labor power have started to disappear, the cheaply available natural resources of the periphery have also begun to reach the point of exhaustion, no longer able to perform their role as repositories of displaced environmental damage and plunderable riches. So this is what we talked about when we said that slowly but even more rapidly the costs will return to the core. As the core, keeps robbing the periphery of its resources through extractivism, it exhausts it completely, and when that happens, the core cannot transfer the cost to its to a periphery, and so it needs to move to another periphery. But what happens when there are no more peripheries? Well, there is no outside to externalize into a periphery. What happens when there is no available resources for capitalism to exploit anymore? When capitalism cannot extract resources to squeeze value out of it, well, what happens? Well, all the negative consequences go back to the core, and they will hit harder than when the periphery was still around. So most peripheries have a pivotal role in regulating the Earth's temperature. That's where you have rainforests, for example. Without them, the weather disasters will become more and more frequent, and temperatures will rise at unprecedented rate, speed and heat. In the face of such a future, not even the core can hope to sustain itself. So the imperial mode of living needs to understand once and for all that the Earth is not unlimited. Like once all resources have been plundered, once the periphery dies, it's game over. A crisis will begin. This is the essence of the crisis plaguing the Anthropocene. Could there be a better example of this than the accelerating climate change crisis? As the periphery is exhausted, the disasters associated with climate change, the super hurricanes, the wildfires and so on, become more and more conspicuous even in the developed world. So the question becomes, now that time has definitely run out for addressing climate change, what can we possibly do to stop it? In short, even the exploiter is now at a disadvantage. He needs the periphery to sustain him, but he has rendered himself dependent on the periphery, so without it he cannot do shit, but his lifestyle is inherently destructive since it exhausts the very things that he relies on for survival. And all this for what? Well, for profits, just to see the rates of economic growth go up. So this obsession with economic growth has been pointed as also, a sign of madness since the 1970s. Back then, when the Cold War was still going on, a report appeared in 1972, commissioned by the Club of Rome. It's a non-profit organization created in Rome in 1968 and is made of intellectuals and business leaders to discuss global issues. So in 1972, they released a report on the issue of economic growth titled The Limits to Growth. And so the report made some controversy as it challenged the impact economic growth has on the environment and its relation with a growing population. And so this sparked a debate which led to the introduction of a new law in the United States called the Energy Reorganization Act of 1974, which established the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is an independent agency responsible for regulating civilian nuclear power plants and materials. So the law was first introduced to the US Congress in 1973, and many professors of economics and ecologists and environmentalists were invited to the hearings. And among them, there was a professor of geology and environmental studies at the University of Wisconsin called John Steinhardt. And he quoted an economist who would become very famous for this quote. Steinhardt was saying at Congress that given, the growing population, which at the time was 3.5 billion, but they already knew that by 2000 it will be at 7 billion. And if it continues growing on that pace, by 2050, we'll be at 24 billion. And so we would be facing a serious problem. And so for Steinhardt, if we continue our economic activities in the way capitalism encourages to, seeking endless growth, then soon we will exhaust the resources of the planet that are rapidly being extracted, and every year faster than the year before it, just to satisfy the growing population. And so Steinhardt's solution is to put a limit to growth. He says a growing level of wealth presumably will have to stop somewhere. And so this is where he gives that famous quote. It's by American economist Kenneth E. Boulding, that Saito also quotes, and it reads, anyone who believes that exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. And we couldn't agree more. Economists usually think that growth can continue indefinitely because, in their view, growth is something measured in terms of economic value rather than, material input. The measure of output for economists is the gross domestic product, the GDP, which is determined by monetary value rather than material weight. So the two for them are separable, and therefore the former doesn't have to be limited by the other. This is for Saito the heights of madness, and what leads to all sorts of justification for what's happening to the global south. Today, everyone thinks like an economist, despite all the evidence that, the earth is dying and resources are plundered. Like Saito says, today we all think like, madmen, since we still hold on to growth. At this point, he brings in Greta Thunberg, now the Swedish activist, because she is young and unlike most adults, she doesn't have this economist mindset yet. This is a theme that will pop out many times throughout the book. Saito will make a contrast between those who have internalized the economist mindset, those who can think, only in terms of economic growth for the future. And so these include adults in the global north, but he also puts his hopes on the youth, which still, resists market logic. According to him, Thunberg is one example of that. In 2018, the story, while she was 15 years old, she went on a school strike for climate. She then got invited to speak at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP24, and at the UN Climate Summit the same year, where she exposed the hypocrisy of politicians who take, measures to combat climate change, but only if those measures prioritize growth. That's her famous "How dare you" speech, where she said that she shouldn't be here, but at school living, a normal kid's life, but she can't because world leaders with their, hopes for always more growth have robbed her of that possibility. She now has to defend what is left of her planet so that, the next generations won't need to sacrifice their youth like she did. So in other words, Thunberg doesn't believe that there can be such thing as a green growth. And she sharply criticizes politicians who speak only of green eternal economic growth. For her, these politicians only pretend to care about the environment just to get a few votes and gain in popularity for further profit, while making, the world believe that they are doing the right thing, or that they are, or that they have everything under control. So Saito agrees with Thunberg. As long as capitalism prioritizes economic growth, the climate crisis cannot be solved, which means that capitalism has to be abandoned altogether, since its very essence is to always prioritize economic growth. And This is clear from the measures taken since the fall of the Berlin Wall. As Saito says, after all, capitalist society wasted its opportunity to combat climate change during the crucial 30 years following the end of the Cold War, preferring instead to concentrate on pursuing the money-making opportunities opened up by globalization and financial market deregulation. Okay, so let's go back to the year before the fall of the Berlin Wall, so 1988. So that year, NASA scientist James Hansen said in front of the US Congress that we are 99% sure that climate change is caused by human activity, and so we are in dire situation to act. During that year, measures were genuinely being considered because international organizations started to form to combat this climate change. You had the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, created by the United Nations Environmental Programme, the UNEP, the UNEP, and the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. And so the IPCC had one job, to quote from Wikipedia, is to provide governments at all levels with scientific information that they can use to develop climate policies. Now, sure, you can say that this too was a smokescreen, that they created this organization in which 159 countries are involved to give, the impression that they are taking this seriously, but this organization has no real power. I mean, it only informs government on what to do, but nothing compels government to even listen to it. Plus, it can be seen as another way of making people think about climate change, producing more and more research about it, but without really doing anything about it. So it can be seen as another smokescreen, a way for capitalism to buy time. It distracts scientists and experts into more and more studies about climate change while it can have a maximum time to keep extracting value, like it just, delays action. However, the creation of such organizations can be, the sign of hope for climate change to be solved with international agreements and treaties. According to Saito, if from back then we started to implement solutions to reduce GHG emissions by 3% each year, there was maybe a chance that we won't be in this situation. So why didn't we? Well, as he said, capitalism can't allow for this, since any efficient way to solve climate change requires that we stop, with the eternal growth fantasy. So capitalism needed something to physically and actually limit it until, eventually it dies. That was the Soviet Union, like we said at the beginning of the episode. The Cold War had its benefits, at least in the fact that it was limiting the spread of capitalism and neoliberalism. But once that wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, there was nothing to stop the spread of neoliberalism. That's the era of globalization, where the entire world became a replica of neoliberal politics. Capitalism now had nothing to stop it, to go exploit cheap labor and marketplaces in the former Soviet Union and its satellite states. And it also destroyed any hopes for actual sovereignty to the countries that just gained their independence from colonialism, as they are now vulnerable to neoliberalism too. This is when the northern countries started reducing their GHG emissions and the southern countries started to raise theirs. That's because the global north started exploiting the cheap labor and resources there as if no independence happened. And so this is why many talk about neo-colonialism today after the fall of the Soviet Union, and we're hopeful that as long as the Soviet Union still stands, neo-colonialism was contained because the Soviet Union was proof that socialism is a serious alternative to capitalism. But once the USSR fell, well, it's like everyone's hopes in socialism vanished as well, and neoliberalism faced no resistance, leading now to an even greater acceleration than that during the 1950s. So to quote from Saito, this great expansion of economic activity after the collapse of the Soviet Union resulted in a similar great acceleration in the consumption of resources. To take one example, almost half of humanity's total consumption of fossil fuels throughout history occurred in the years following the end of the Cold War in 1989. At note 16, Saito mentions David Wallace Wells, the on uninhabitable Earth, life after warming. And on page 4, for the reference that he just gave in the quote, half of humanity's total consumption of fossil fuels happened after 1989. That's just in 3 decades. In 30 years, human beings have burned the half of their total consumption of fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution. In Wallace's book, he says that many perceive global warming as a sort of moral and economic debt accumulated since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and now come due after several centuries. In fact, more than half of the carbon exhaled into the atmosphere by the burning of fossil fuel has been emitted in just the past 3 decades. The past 3 decades, that's from 1989. After the USSR collapsed, we have burned more than what we've burned since 1750. From 1750 to 1990, we've emitted about 710 gigatons of CO2, and it took us more than 2 centuries to emit that much. But after 1990 to today, in just 30 years or so, we've emitted now 990 gigatons of CO2. So when you had people like Hansen stressing how important we have to reduce emissions, the collapse of the Soviet Union dashed all of that talk, bringing in people like Nordhaus to convince us that we should, under no circumstances, give up on economic growth and seize the opportunity of the USSR's collapse to spread even more neoliberal policies. You can see the result on this graph, by the way, from the Carbon Dioxide Information Analysis Center, the CDIAC, and the Global Carbon Project. So this graph shows the amount of CO2 emissions each year from the latter half of the 18th century to 2017. So the x-axis is the years and the y-axis is the amount of emissions time 100 million tons. As you can see, the amount of CO2 emissions exploded after 1950s, and that's the start of the Great Acceleration. From 1945 to 1989, we have released between 5 billion tons to 25 billion tons of CO2 every single year. I say billion because you have to multiply by 100 million. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that went even faster. From 1989 to 2017, so in about 30 years, we went from releasing 25 to 35 billion tons. We increased the emissions by 10 billion tons in 30 years. And if you look at the graph, you'll see something interesting. First, notice that the richest nations are those who release the least CO2, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, the rate amount that they release is getting steadier, if not decreasing. After 1989, their emissions plateau or even decline. They keep emitting CO2, but the rates are declining. The European Union members and the rest of European countries are reducing their CO2 emissions rates, the USA as well, and the Americans too, Canada, but also South America, although that's mostly because of Canada. If you take away Canada and you just look at Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, etc., they're increasing their CO2 emissions even more rapidly after the fall of the USSR, and mostly because of the rapid deforestation happening there. The Middle East too, and Africa as well are getting steady, but as for Asia and Pacific regions, China and India, it is skyrocketing. That's because these are the regions where the global north has transferred most costs of its lifestyle. Most of the things produced in those regions are produced to then be exported back to the north. The highest contribution to CO2 emissions is international export, but it would be more accurate to say unequal exchange here. Without the Soviet Union, capital can now, circulate freely, ushering an even more brutal era of imperialism and neocolonialism, which increases the emissions at unprecedented rate. Thus, after 1989, we witnessed another great acceleration, one that is even more violent and faster than the one from the 1950s. So this is Saito, what Saito calls that missed opportunity of 30 years and why many young voices like Greta are important. He says, it comes from her anger at the irresponsibility of adults who wasted this precious chance to do something because they could only think about what was right in front of their faces. The actions of politicians and other elites who still prioritize economic growth above all else and whose attitudes haven't changed one bit, only pour fuel on the fire of this anger. As Thunberg put it, you don't listen to the science because you are only interested in solutions that will enable you to carry on like before, like now. And those answers don't exist anymore because you did not act in time. So Thunberg pointed out that the system that created a problem will never lead to its solution, and ended her address to the COP24 by saying, change is coming whether you like it or not. Young people around the world have responded with fervent support for her and her message. So that's from her other address to the British Parliament on 23rd of April 2019. So that's the contrast between the adults and the children. The adults only care about economic growth, not realizing that their children will have to deal with its consequences. Today, the climate crisis is mostly hitting today's generation, who has to put up with not just the climate disasters, but an economy in crisis that fuels those, disasters, which then, fuel the crisis. So it's only natural that many are angry and express their hate towards capitalism, and it's time we seriously consider alternatives to the economist mindset. Obviously, those who are responsible for it won't be of any help, so we need to go where that mindset is absent. So children certainly, but also the global south, because it is suffering from that mindset, but even more importantly to someone from the 19th century who predicted all of this. And yeah, you guessed it, next time we are going to talk about Karl Marx. I'm going to stop here, so this chapter will take 2 episodes. So next week we are going to read the second part of this chapter. We're going to talk about Karl Marx and and how Marx predicted this climate crisis. And that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you find it interesting. And as always, thank you for watching.